Our first story is from Reddit admin Dumb87. Call me a race trader and a PM on Reddit? Let's destroy your life. A few years ago, on a different Reddit account, I mentioned that I was in an interracial relationship. A Redditor's reached out to me and told me I was a race trader and unfaithful to my race. I was like, WTF, bro? I looked at his account. It was 6 years old, which told me his username was likely something he used a lot. So I started Googling his username Igmail, username Iahoo, etc., and I found a match with Hotmail. A guy by the name of, let's say, Jeff, was selling some NFL game tickets and had posted his email. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean it's the same person. However, in the post, he mentioned a city in America and that he was a fan of a particular football team. I went through the Reddit user post history. He posted quite a bit in the respective city subreddits. He mentioned going to NFL games, and in another post, he also said he was born in Canada. So, through the ad for the NFL ticket, I figured out his real name. I found his biography on his employer's website. He was a senior level manager, so they had a bio for him. In that bio, they mentioned he was born in Canada, was a fan of said NFL team, and loved living in the city. I also found his LinkedIn page during this time, so I sent him a connect request on LinkedIn, which he accepted. I figured he would, because he had 500 plus connections. So here's what we know. His username matches his email handle. He likes the NFL team. He lives in a said city that he posts in said city's subreddits. He was born in Canada. I then found his Facebook page. His Facebook page was public, and he posted what I would describe as semi-racist material. Also, his Reddit page was significantly more racist. Based on the numerous connecting factors, I determined, so I create a report. I included screenshots and links and summarized my findings in that report. Now, based on this person's position in his company, he likely had a significant role in deciding who this company employs. Also, his company clearly stated they were an equal opportunity employer. So I called their HR department, I found the number, and I called them. And I asked them, would you be concerned if a senior level manager in your organization was a proud racist and degraded your equal opportunity employment policies? They were concerned. So I told them I had done an investigation into one of their senior level managers and described he was racist, and I had put together all my evidence and findings in a report and could email it over to them. I emailed them the report. A few weeks later, I called to get an update, and I was told they appreciated my report. However, they would have to comment on the status of their decision and make public statements in regard. Basically, thanks for letting us know, but we aren't going to tell you shit. That's fine. So I waited another month, and I kept checking his LinkedIn page. Then one day, I saw a LinkedIn post from him in which he said he is looking for a new opportunity and if anyone had any positions open. So I messaged him on Reddit and I told him, hey bro, heard you got fired. Just want you to know, I'm the reason why. He threatened to find out who I was, hunt me down, rape my spouse, and strangle me to death. So I reported him to Reddit admins who promptly perma-banned him. Now, he really should have learned his lesson. Because guess what? He didn't connect the dots. He didn't know I could see all his LinkedIn activity. He didn't know who I was. He simply acted in rage. So I put his newest message in his folder and added it the report. Because, you see, I can be an incredibly vindictive motherfucker. I checked his LinkedIn once a week. Good news, he got another job. Bad news, their HR department was also quite easy to get a hold of and discuss their new horizontal racist, threatening behavior. However, let's just say I had a lovely conversation with this HR representative. She was a woman, and based on how she sounded, and her name, I suspect she was a woman of color. So, yay. I'm not sure what happened after this because a few weeks later his internet history was cleaned up and his LinkedIn page was deleted. However, this company listed their senior management, which was what his position was. I never saw his name listed. What I suspect happened is after his HR reviewed my evidence, they terminated his employment with them. I would have totally gone after him a third time. But he got smart the second time around. TL. Deekta guy called me a race traitor. I got him fired from not one, but two jobs. Hey, BTW Jeff, if you see this post, I'd love for you to send me a new message. I really enjoyed the little game I played with you. I also question, how did you handle getting fired from two jobs back to back on your resume and in future job interviews? The revenge was devastatingly effective. By using the internet to uncover the racist troll's identity, OP strategically exposed his behavior to his employers, costing him two jobs. The second story is from Pavoya. I had a member of staff, M, try to force himself onto another staff member, F. She chose not to press charges. That didn't sit right with me. To preface, I live in a country that employs a large foreign expat workforce in pretty much every industry and in all levels. For someone to move here for work, they have to be sponsored by a company or the individual that's employing them. I own and operate a small restaurant business here and employ more than a handful of foreigners as servers, cleaners, kitchen staff, drivers, etc. So here's the story. I was lounging on my couch enjoying the last of my weekend one day when I get a call from telling me that one of our sponsored employees, a server, let's call her Janice, was picked up for indecent exposure essentially. Long story short, she was caught hooking up with a guy in a private booth at a local restaurant. Basically, the police walked in on them whilst engaged in some seriously heavy petting. They were fully clothed, but the guy she was with, or practically on top of I should say, has his junk out. Turns out he works at the restaurant 2 doors down from where she worked. After a bit of chastising and threatening to escalate the situation and have them deported to sufficiently scare their senses back into them, they let them go, but not before signing a pledge-type document promising to never repeat the offence. Or else. A slap on the wrist, basically, and everyone got to go home, but it doesn't end there. That night, something clicked in my brain, and I had the thought, how and why did the police find them in a private booth in the back of a restaurant before the restaurant's own staff did? So I called the restaurant the next day. I thought maybe they called the police on them immediately for some reason. Or maybe the couple got belligerent when staff asked him to stop. Turns out the staff didn't notice a thing. In fact, up until that day, the police have never been to that restaurant before. And when they did, they simply walked in, went straight to the back booths where the two were sat, and busted right in. I realized this meant that someone must have seen them and called the cops on them point blank. The question was, who? I decided to speak to Janice. I wanted to speak to her anyway that day, both to check in and get her version of the situation. I also gave her the employer, "You know you did something stupid, chat," and reassure her that she's keeping her job. I also wanted to ask her who she thought called her in. Without hesitation, she said it had to be Sammy, who was one of our drivers. "Why do you think it was Sammy?" I asked. "He's the one that dropped me off at the restaurant that day. He might have seen my friend walk in right after me and called the police on us," she said. I knew the part of him dropping her off was true. That literally his job and her only free mode of transport. "Well, that sounds a bit drastic. Why would he do that, even if he had seen you do anything?" I asked. She claimed it was because he was jealous. He was really into her, apparently, and kept trying to get her into bed, she said. What genuinely pissed me off was when she told me that he actually tried to force himself on her once, and she fought him off, and that he hasn't tried or even said anything since other than be very short and curt with her. My immediate response was, "Why on earth would you not tell me or one of your managers right away?" She said she had dealt with it her way, and it stopped. Plus, she didn't want anybody to get fired on her account, and she didn't want any interaction with the authorities, so she decided not to make a big deal out of it in the first place. She also declined to press formal charges against him, which I advised her to do. Her declining infuriated me even more. This guy was going to get off scot-free. Now, clearly, I was about to fire Sammy, but in my mind, that wasn't enough. For someone to attempt to rape a person, basically, and not get in trouble for it? Not okay with me. But it seemed like it was something I had to live with. Obviously, my next conversation of the day was with Sammy. My intent was to confront him with the accusations. I called him into my office. I didn't really know where to start, so I went with, "Obviously, you've heard about what happened to Janice this weekend?" He stepped in it right away. "Heard about it?" came the unexpectedly proud response from a proud AF and positively beaming Sammy. "I called it in." And this is where it started to get super satisfying. You see, for a couple of years since I met Sammy every now and then, he would pull out and show us all pictures of his wife, who was back home living with his mother. She was younger than him and quite beautiful, but sadly barren, which is apparently why she settled with an older fart like him. He was so proud of how pretty she was. He was also a devout religious man, or so he claimed. So I asked, "And why call the police?" He came back with, "After I dropped her off, I waited to see who she was meeting because she's a troublemaker woman. When I saw the man walk in after her, I called police because I know him and he is married, and this is against the laws of God and man." I'm smiling now. I knew I got him. Why do that instead of calling your direct manager or even me? And before even seeing for yourself what they were doing exactly at that? Why make it my problem and the company's problem what she does in her own time? Silence. Head down counting his shoes. "Sammy, I know why. I know what you did. Janice just told me. I'm disgusted by you and sorry that we hired you." He had the audacity to mumble, "I only tried once, sir." I almost slapped him. Anyways, I fired him, handed him a one-way ticket home, which was in 4 hours, and told him to GTFO. This is where I get my not-so-petty revenge. I had his house phone number saved somewhere from "We hired him." It was on his CV. I knew that because I called him there to interview him before we first hired him. I waited until his flight took off and dialed the number. I assumed either his mother or wife would answer the call, but I was wishing for the latter. I got my wish. "Hello, Mrs. Sammy. I'm your husband's employer. Well, his former employer anyway. Just so you know, I fired him a few hours ago and he's on a flight home as we speak. His flight number is XXXXX. He will be arriving at XXX. Just so you are aware, I was forced to fire him because he attempted to rape a fellow employee half his age." "I'm sorry," I said, and promptly hung up, but not before hearing her gasping in shock. It was truly a destructive revenge. The most crucial part was when the employer called Sammy's wife and informed her of her husband's attempts on a server. I am sure Sammy would still be facing the consequences of his actions if his wife had not kicked him out of the home. Undoubtedly, this was the ultimate revenge. The story is also from Khaled in the 90s. Revenge on a client who tried to throw me under the bus. I was pushing 40, and I'd learned a lot of lessons in more than 10 years of legal practice. But one of the most important lessons I learned was from an older lawyer that I worked for as a summer student after the second year of law school. "A lawyer has 3 duties," he told me. "First to himself, second to the court, and last, the client. Always make sure you come first and the client comes last." The reason? "Because clients will fuck you," he said. "They'll throw you under the bus without thinking twice." I should have stayed with this lawyer, but being young and an idiot, I had to go work downtown, and I'm still downtown now. But fortunately for me, I remembered this lesson, and it came in handy many years later when a client really did try to throw me under the bus. My client was this mid-sized company that did this and that, and owned things here and there, not big enough to be listed, but it did have a pretty sizable real estate portfolio, and one day, a building they owned burned to the ground. The company wanted to collect on the insurance, so they told Frank, a veteran salaryman, to deal with it. Frank was close to 60 and thought he knew what he was doing. He didn't need me to help him with the insurance claim, he told me. He had everything under control. Besides, lawyers are expensive. Some guys really get off on not paying legal fees, and Frank was one of those guys who gloated over every penny that he managed not to pay to the lawyers. I dealt with Frank a lot, and he was always nickel and dimming me. "The insurer is going to fuck you," I told Frank. It was only by luck that I even knew about the fire and the loss, because Frank had not asked for my help. He'd just let it slip one day, and since then, I'd kept on top of him, trying to get him to smarten up. I'd had to fight to get him to send me the proof of loss form to make sure he hadn't messed that up. Frank fucked up a lot, and I wondered sometimes how he had a job. But the proof of loss was okay at least, so that was one less thing to worry about. "You don't know that," he said. I could tell he just wanted to get me off the phone. "I'm paid to know when insurers are trying to screw my clients," I said, "and the insurer is going to screw you. They've been stringing you along for ages with requests and questions and paperwork, but they aren't going to pay you, not unless you sue them." But Frank said he knew what he was doing, that it was all under control, and besides, he got along with the adjuster so great. "The limitation period expires in 2 weeks," I said, "and once that 2 weeks pass, it will be too late to sue. The moment that limitation period expires, they will stop taking your calls. You'll get a final email saying, 'Sorry, you're out of time,' and that will be that. Don't leave this till the last minute. Let me sue right now, and you'll have the money in no time." Frank was like, "Sure, fine, whatever. Don't bother me, I got this, blah, blah, blah." And he got off the phone as soon as he could. I sent him the usual email with clear warnings and recommendations, which he ignored. I sent the email again, and then again as the limitation period approached, and again a couple of days before the deadline. "I'm going to be at trial, and you won't be able to reach me," my final email said. "But you have to sue. You have other firms on your list, so pick one and sue." He didn't bother to reply, and I went off to do my trial. The trial lasted a couple of weeks, and no email from Frank. Then a month passed, and another month, still no email. I figured he must have sorted things out. Maybe Frank was right after all, I said to myself, and then my phone rang. It was Frank. "Remember that fire insurance thing we spoke about?" We'd only spoken about it like a dozen times. I figured he was calling up to gloat, so I cut to the chase. "So they paid out." "That's great, Frank. You were right." He asked me what I was talking about and could he see a copy of the claim? "What claim?" I said. "The claim against the insurer. You know, that claim." "Does that mean the insurer didn't pay?" I said. He hung up on me, and then a few minutes later, my computer dinged, and there was Frank's email talking about how we spoke, and he told me to sue, and he was worried when I hadn't sent him a copy of the claim, so he was following up to get a copy of the claim. I emailed him back. "I take it that the insurer didn't pay you, just like I told you they wouldn't, and now that the limitation period has expired, they told you to jump in the lake, leaving you with a loss in the millions. Is that it?" I'd made a mistake by not going over Frank's head when he wouldn't listen to me, but if I'd gone over Frank's head, I never would have received another file from him, so I didn't. But that was then, and this was now. So I CC'd Frank's boss and his boss's boss, plus I CC'd Bill, the client's in-house counsel. Bill acknowledged my email right away and called me later that day. "Frank messed up," he said. "We know that. He's an idiot. So what do we do?" "So his excuses didn't work?" "Nope." Bill explained that they'd summoned Frank to a boardroom, but his story didn't add up, given all the warnings I'd sent him. Besides, there would have been no reason for him to keep emailing the insurer if he'd told me to sue. Once the file goes to legal counsel, Frank's role was over. The company knew Frank was bullshitting them. "So that's it then?" Bill said. "We just lost a couple of $1,000,000? "It's okay," I said, explaining that when I realized that Frank was going to fuck up, I issued a claim against the insurer. Because I'd made Frank send me the proof of loss a while earlier, I had enough information that I could sue to preserve the cause of action. Not a great claim and short on details, but good enough. "You sued without instructions?" Bill said. "Lawyers aren't supposed to sue without instructions, because if you do that, you're personally liable for whatever costs the other side incurs. It's a big deal to sue without instructions." "Yup," I said. "I sued without instructions." I pulled up a copy of the claim and emailed it to him as we spoke. "It's a little rough," I said, "but we can always amend." "Thank God," Bill said. "Can I leave it with you?" Of course he could. The insurer was a sitting duck, and I knew I'd collect from them, no problem. A few days later, I got a call from another guy who worked for the client, a guy I didn't normally deal with. They had a situation and needed my help. I usually deal with Frank, I said. What's up? What was up was that Frank got called into another meeting and they handed him a one-page letter. And then he put his little office things in a box and security walked him past his co-workers to the elevator and escorted him downstairs to the parking lot. Bye-bye, Frank. He was too old to get another job, or at least not a decent one. It was a life-changing event for Frank. But for me, he was just an anecdote, a cautionary tale that I tell young lawyers sometimes over beers. Maybe too often, because I'm getting on in years and I have my favorite stories. I wasn't trying to get revenge on Frank, not at all, and I would have felt a bit sorry for him if he hadn't been trying to throw me under the bus. But the guy who replaced him was great and never nickel and dimed me. So it was all good. Though not intentional, it was really a perfect revenge. Frank's non-serious behavior of ignoring legal advice would have cost the company millions if the lawyers had not filed a claim without Frank's instruction. The lawyer turned out to be a hero and savior for the company. And on the other hand, the incident was the beginning of the professional downfall of Mark. Such a non-serious executive deserves it. The story is from Present Platypus 578. Boss from hell gets what she deserves. I, 30 as F, have been a people pleaser to a fault my whole life. I have been working in marketing for 10 plus years. Over the years, I've had my fair share of bosses who were good, average, and some who sucked. There is one in particular that stood out as awful. This story is from about 5+ years ago. Pamela, 40s, not real name, was the VP of Marketing and Sales for a mid-size retailer. She started at the company a few years after I did, and if rumors were true, she was the fourth pick for the position and was simply hired so the company could appease shareholders. I was a manager under her, and my whole job was to make sure the website and stores had their products merchandised properly, received all their monthly sales materials, managed advertising, set up and managed the department's budget, PM'd all department projects and operations, created reporting to reflect sales, managed presentations, creative briefs for future projects, etc. In short, I did her work and all the administrative grunt work to keep the department afloat. I managed all this because I had access to her email, and many times sent emails on her behalf to keep the department functioning. Pamela spent most of her time showing up after 10 a.m., taking business lunches, and planning company parties. Don't even know why we did those, but I planned those too. I consistently questioned why she spent so much of our budget on these events when we didn't have the budget resources for any of it. Pamela told me to take from future months' budgets to pay for the current month's overspending. So, at the start of every month, I had an original budget, and by the end of the month, I had to turn in an edited budget, edited under Pamela's direction, that made it look like Pamela's spending was under control. This is important for later. I definitely made mistakes here and there being in charge of so many tasks, and constantly found myself working 12-hour days split between being in the office and working after my kid went to bed. Weekend work was also done before my family woke up and after they went to bed. During Pamela's first major holiday season, sales were shit. Pamela kept changing her mind on the visuals for the stores, kept bringing on new advertising and PR agencies to bring in sales. All these agencies consisted of her personal friends, and ignored our buying merchandise team's planned promotions for her own better ones. At this time, I had been dealing with an ongoing infection that turned to sepsis and was hospitalized. The doctors and my husband said it was due to the stress of work and that I needed to take a break. As I recovered, I realized how much I was hurting myself, my family, and even the company I worked for. Eventually, my old habits got to me, and I got on my phone and checked mine and my boss's emails. What I found made my blood boil. First, I got a lovely bouquet of flowers from upper management wishing me well, and I knew that Pamela organized the delivery. She sent me her favorite flowers. I went to her inbox to put the receipt in the correct folder to send to accounting when I got back. At the top of her inbox from the past 3 days were emails clearly not related to business. What I found in her emails was Pamela emailing her personal friends, griping on how I can't just shake off sepsis and get back to work. She also complained that she couldn't find any of my notes, spreadsheets, or documents for any of the work she was technically in charge of. They were on our shared drive labelled very clearly. Finally, I found an email where she sent a friend from a previous company asking for advice on how to bring in sales and save her job. In this long thread, this old colleague asked if there was anyone managing most of the work, and of course, Pamela said I was. This colleague explained that clearly it was my mismanagement that was causing issues, and that I could be blamed if sales didn't pull through by the end of the season. Pamela mentioned that I was in the hospital and repeated comments from her other email thread. This person said that she couldn't outright fire me because it could seem like retaliation because I needed to take emergency medical leave. But if Pamela could prove I was stealing from the company or misusing company resources, then she would have grounds to have me fired and use me as a scapegoat. Upon my return, Pamela called me into her office and said she was worried I was taking on too much and wanted to take work off my plate. She announced was taking managing the department budget off my plate. She asked me to only drop of a small stack of invoices to accounting. Additionally, Pamela told me under no circumstances was I allowed to talk to accounting about anything regarding budgets. Also, if I had any concerns about the department or workload, I wasn't allowed to go to HR. I had to discuss it directly with Pamela. Oh yeah, I could see where this was going. Unfortunately for Pamela, I had built a rapport with Lois, 50s, not real name, who was our main accountant. Lois always said that she would do everything in her power to help me should I ask. Knowing this, I grabbed the stack of invoices off Pamela's desk to give to accounting. I also added the email threads I read while I was in the hospital, and the current unedited budget that Pamela hadn't touched yet for the month. I also found in my filing cabinet the hard copies of old budgets with Pamela's handwriting on what numbers to change to balance our budget. Finally, I added an email from our first round of budget adjustments where Pamela's subtlety threatened to put someone else in my job if I couldn't do what she asked. So I walked and dropped off the invoices to accounting. When I bumped into Lois, she brought up invoices, and I sternly looked at her and said, Pamela is the only one in our department that Lois is allowed to talk to about our budget and invoices. Lois saw the suspiciously thick file folder on her desk, gave a firm nod, and lovingly kicked me out of her office. Within the week, Pamela was fired. From what I understand, she has been continually job hopping for the past few years. The CEO and HR brought me in to personally apologize for everything I went through and gave me a paid 1-week vacation to take at my discretion. Given other issues with this business, I left after another year. Which brings me to today. I am, once again, a manager for sales and marketing. I have a wonderful boss, Mike, 40s M, who trusts my business decisions and backs me up on practically everything. We are hiring my team for me to solely manage and direct. Today, I looked through the applicants and found Pamela's resume sitting among dozens of others. I stared at her name, wondering how many other people share her name. Upon review, yup, it's her. She definitely fell down the corporate ladder, with VP of our old company being the highest title she earned. And, to no surprise, she embellished her achievements, claiming the work I managed as her own, and claimed she generated an 87% sales growth during the holiday season at our previous company. As a people pleaser who firmly believes in giving everyone a chance, it has never been so satisfying to click disqualified. Edit. To those suggesting I interview her to see her reaction, I would have loved to see her face as she walked in. But I felt it would have risked my boss's trust in my decision-making ability. Maybe I'll send a personally written rejection email. Wow, what an incredible revenge. OP's boss constantly took credit for her work, overspent the budget, and plotted to make OP her scapegoat after she was hospitalized for sepsis. These actions on the part of OP are not justifiable at all, and what OP did was very fair. It is what OP deserved, getting fired from the job. OP took a really pro revenge. The next story is from the Venetia. Landlord screwed with the wrong tenant for too long. This will be decently long as it needs some context. I'm going to throw in a lot of stuff to make it all easier to understand as well. Minor details might not be entirely accurate, as I've no interest in a revival of this conflict on any level. I won completely, and any resurrection can only taint the experience. We'll start off by noting that I spent about 2 decades working in security. During that time, I worked many different types of security in many different locations. The one that matters for this story was time spent in the rental housing tribunal in a major city, as a kind of bailiff. For those not knowing what that is, think a courtroom. In a major city anyway. In a smaller town, it'll probably be an event room in a hotel or community centre, as you'd see on TV, but with less formality and an adjudicator instead of a judge. They functionally are the same thing to landlords and tenants, but they definitely aren't the same thing. This place exclusively deals with landlord and tenant disputes, and is the only place to resolve landlord and tenant disputes. Note that I wasn't a bailiff, and it wasn't a court, but these terms mostly accurately describe the situation and my place in it. For 2 years, I worked at the Rental Housing Tribunal. It was early in my time in security. I was 18 to 20. Being as it was a major city, the sheer number of cases I sat through was beyond my ability to count. I saw everything there was to see. No one is capable of surprising me with a story because I've seen them all. In detail, as a side duty of mine was to ensure all parties had copies of all evidence being presented. I did a lot of photocopying and always read/inspected everything I copied to ensure nothing got cut off or made illegible. By the time I stopped working there, I probably knew the way everything worked well enough to be an adjudicator myself. Well, no, obviously not, but I'm certainly in no need of a lawyer either, should I ever have need to go there. I also had intimate knowledge of how the system worked beyond the actual rules. Like, for example, adjudicators would always give a little leeway to anyone representing themselves over someone who had a lawyer. Or how pissed off adjudicators would get when a party was speaking out of turn. Seriously, do not do that. Skip forward almost a decade. I left the city and am in a fairly large town in the same province. Same tenant laws. I have a few roommates in a decently sized townhouse. We get along well. But there's a problem. Only I can write checks and our paydays don't line up. So I'm the one who pays the rent, and I usually can't do it on the first because roommates don't usually all pay in time. We advise the landlord, we might be a day or two late, but we'll always have it by the third at the latest. They have no problem with it at all. I spoke to them myself. For about a year, this works fine. No complaints from landlord because even if we're often a day or two late, we always pay. We're also fairly quiet and don't damage the property. Nearly model tenants. I do not actually have any idea why, but one day this changed. I suspect a different person in the company started overseeing the region. One day, suddenly, we got a summons to the Rental Housing Tribunal, hereafter to be referred to as RHT, on the 2nd of the month for failure to pay rent. This doesn't actually lead to a case because we paid the same day. But now, we have to pay the application fee the landlord paid in order to serve the summons. I bitched to the neighbour, who was also the superintendent, and eventually heard back that their contact at the company was now demanding 1st of the month, no exceptions. Well, that really didn't work for us, so we probably had to pay that fee 15 to 20 times over the next 2 years. I could have gone to tribunal over it, but we were technically without a leg to stand on, and I knew it. Maybe if I went enough times, I can ding them for harassment, but I don't have time for that and my roommates don't care. After being split between us all, the fee wasn't enough deterrent to change our behaviour, so we accepted it. If this was the only issue, there wouldn't be much story though. At around the same time, the rent leeway vanished. So did mandatory maintenance. I'm not going to list everything that went wrong and wasn't fixed. You'll get a decent idea at the end. We suffered through it. We were all working too many hours at shit pay to be able to actually do anything about it. We adapted. But after about 2 years, it broke. Everyone but me up and moved out for various reasons within a 4-month period. I'm not going into any details on my roommates at all, because things kind of exploded for a couple different reasons outside of this. No reason to dig any of that up. I had been saving up a while and was able to quit my job without having to immediately get another, so I suddenly had a lot of time. I didn't want to stay and pay the rent by myself or have to find new roommates I could live with, and with my experience in the RHT, I knew I had the landlord by the balls. So I went for them. I stopped paying rent. Annoyingly, I didn't get a summons the first month, but I did the second, so I went, with a meticulously documented plethora of evidence of failure to maintain the property and entering the property without formal notice. I had a copy for the landlord and a copy for the adjudicator. I know from experience that technically you're supposed to give the other party the evidence before the tribunal, but I also knew about that leeway an adjudicator gives to those who represent themselves. So I didn't give the landlord the evidence until our case came up, 100% total ambush. They argued they were ambushed, but the adjudicator just dismissed the case, dressed me down a little, and told me to file my own summons, as I should have done. This was the petty revenge. The landlord and lawyer drove 3 hours to get there for nothing. Worse than nothing. I filed my own summons, and the big day shows up. It's been about 4 months of me not paying rent at this point. I'm prepared to if I lose, but I don't think I'm going to lose. The whole thing could not have gone better. I had 20 to 30 pages of evidence and 20-odd photographs. They had nothing. They had no actual defense for our water heater being out for 6 months, or us not having a fridge for a year, just to mention 2 severe issues. Their entire defense rested on us being late for rent, which actually worked against them once that led to the adjudicator learning how many times we'd paid the application fee, and lies that had no evidence to support them. They even talked over me a few times, and I saw in his eyes the one time I opened my mouth to protest during their turn to speak, but forced myself to shut up with every gram of willpower I had, so only a squeak came out. The adjudicator respected me. He had no respect for the landlord. I had won on every possible front. The only question was how much. It was more than I'd ever seen. I got 9 months of free rent, and the landlord was ordered to have everything fixed before the next month was over, or I'd get more. I gave notice I was leaving at the end of the 8th month and left at the end of the 9th. Because the landlord had never renewed the lease, I didn't have to give him the 3-month notice the lease specified. If you want a figure to put to it, I basically got a $13,000 judgment in my favor, adjusted for inflation and rounded. I also made the landlord and lawyer drive 3 hours, twice, only to lose. The landlord's face was so red at the end I thought he'd have a heart attack. He didn't though. Bye, Mark. Edit to clarify a few things based on questions. And I also want to add for those good landlords out there, I do feel you. My time in the RHT was eye-opening. For every bad landlord, there are 10 bad tenants easily. There's a massive debate of debates to have over the whole thing. I'll only say that I do sympathise with the good landlords out there. I'm not trying to paint all landlords as terrible. This is the only landlord I've ever had that was so useless. Edit. I've revised my estimate of the ratio based on a little research and some comments from 30 tenants per landlord to 10. I'm probably still wrong, but the sheer number disparity between landlords and tenants effectively requires there be more bad tenants than bad landlords simply because there are so many more tenants than landlords. I'm going to leave it at that and just beg you not to rip me apart from either side. I'm intimately aware of the problems both good landlords and good tenants face, and my sympathy goes out to both sides. Wow, the revenge was perfect. The experience and patience of the OP paid off, and the terrible behaviour of the landlord finally forced him to pay $13,000, not to mention the embarrassment he faced in the end. Almost all landlords are the same. Terrible, meticulous and selfish, always trying to squeeze every last penny out of their tenants. Our story is from Branson on. My boss stole my Super Bowl tickets, so I made him lose a major client. With the NFL playoffs back on, I thought you all might enjoy this football-related revenge story. I'm a huge 49ers fan, the rabid all-day tailgate in the parking lot type. A few years ago, we made it back to the Super Bowl. I was working at a consulting firm with a handful of accounts I would interact with directly. One client in particular knew how big of a Niners fan I was. I was the day-to-day lead on his account. He really liked working with me, and we became friends, often grabbing drinks or dinner after our meetings. He had access to a pair of extra company seats to the game, and as a thank you, wanted to give them to me as a gift. He passed the tickets over to the partner on that account, who I will refer to as Dickhead Partner, to be given to me as a surprise. The game came and went, we lost, it sucked. The next time we met, we went to drinks afterward, and he mentioned, "Hey, by the way, why didn't you go to the game? I heard someone else was in your seats." I asked, "What game?" He said, "The Super Bowl." Confused, I answered, "I didn't have seats to the Super Bowl?" He told me that he gave Dickhead Partner a pair of his company tickets for me as a gift so I could attend. I had zero idea what he was talking about. He looked shocked, told me to quietly ask around about it and get back to him. When I was back in the office the next week, I found out through one of the secretaries that Dickhead Partner had given a pair of Super Bowl tickets to another one of his clients as a gift from our company. I might have let this sort of thing go to keep the peace under different circumstances, but these were seats on the 30-yard line to see the fucking 49ers play in the Super Bowl. I was pissed. I considered confronting Dickhead Partner myself, but realized it was the client who had noticed I wasn't there in the first place, so if I let him handle it, there would be no blowback on me. So I texted him, "Hey, I just wanted to thank you so much for thinking of me with those seats. It appears that they were given to another one of our firm's clients." He texted back right away, in all caps, "Are you shitting me?" And then, "Pretend I never told you, let me handle." He followed up with me about formulating a plan. A few days later, we were asked to come down for a meeting in their office. The client requested the partner be present, not entirely unusual, so Dickhead Partner and I hopped a flight the next week and headed over to their office. Little did Dickhead Partner know, my client had orchestrated a wonderfully awkward little show to catch him red-handed. When we entered the conference room, it was all the usual suspects, along with a woman in her 30s we didn't recognize. My client immediately introduces Dickhead Partner. "This is Stephanie such and such, VP from other department. She wanted to sit in on this meeting." "Hey, OP, you guys must already know her from the Super Bowl." She then responds as she goes to shake my hand. "Oh, I don't think so. Did we meet there? I'm sorry if I forgot." Client responds, "Geez, Steph, how much did you have to drink? They were sitting right next to you." Client looks at me and I say, "Sorry, client, I wasn't there. Are you thinking of someone else?" At this point, Dickhead Partner is looking visibly uncomfortable, probably trying to come up with an excuse. He starts in with an when Stephanie says over him, "No, so-and-so from other company were in the other seats." By the way, I was wondering why we gave company seats to those guys. Is there a project we're working with them on that I don't know about? Obviously not. They were in completely different industries. It would be like Coca-Cola partnering with John Deere. Dickhead Partner lets out an again, and the client immediately speaks over him asking, "Dickhead Partner, I gave you those tickets for OP?" At this point, Dickhead Partner is turning bright red. He responds, "Oh, well, he wasn't able to make it, so he must have given the seats away to someone else," and turns to me, looking for me to cover for him. Client smirks at me. I respond, what are you talking about? Client, you gave me tickets to the Super Bowl?" Client suddenly raises his voice. "Dickhead Partner, those tickets were a personal thank you gift from me to OP. Did you give them away to someone else?" Pause. "Was it another client?" Dickhead Partner butts in with, "Oh, maybe something got mixed up in the office?" Client went quiet for what probably seemed like an eternity to Dickhead Partner. He then looked down, grabbed his portfolio and iPad, put them into his briefcase and said, "I think this meeting is over. OP, it seems as if I owe you a thank you gift. Let's go to lunch. Stephanie, you're welcome to join. Dickhead Partner, I need to evaluate our relationship. Please go back home and expect to hear from us next week." Dickhead partner suggests he would like to join, presumably to do damage control, and Stephanie sternly tells him, "I don't think that's a good idea," and asks the front desk to see Dickhead partner out. As soon as he is in the elevator, we all break out laughing hysterically. Stephanie wasn't really a VP, just an employee at the company who client had drafted into helping with his pre-planned meeting skit, but she did end up coming to lunch with us and was a fellow Niners fan and total blast to hang out with. On our way to the restaurant, I got a desperate text from Dickhead partner saying I needed to cover for the firm and that we could discuss things when I got back. I replied, "Yes, we need to talk, but I'll see what I can do." Client told me to wait a couple hours and then respond to him. 1. To expect invoices for the resale value of the Super Bowl tickets. Resale is way above face value. It was over 10K, as well as our lunch. He picked a pricey spot and made a big show of overspending, and that he expected them to be paid immediately. 2. Expected I be given a direct apology. 3. Expected a written apology to his company for what he considered theft. And 4. He will only interact with me or another one of our firm's partners, never Dickhead partner. This whole thing caused a stir with the other partners, and I actually came off looking great because it appeared that I had made a good faith effort to save the client for the firm despite being the victim in this situation. The client would transfer to another partner, which meant Dickhead partner lost his profit share on any work with them. Oh, and the other partners in the firm made Dickhead partner pay the invoices back out of his salary. In retrospect, I really have no idea what the hell the guy was thinking. Did he seriously believe the client would just not notice me not thanking him for Super Bowl tickets? Anyway, the well was kind of poisoned for me there long term because Dickhead partner wasn't going anywhere. I left the firm a few months later for a much better position. Client ultimately terminated their relationship with that firm. A year later, he actually now works with a good friend of mine at a competing firm. I'm still pissed I missed out on the Super Bowl even though we lost, hoping we make it back this year so I can finally go to one in person. Go Niners! It was an epic revenge on the boss. OP did a very good job by exposing the boss for stealing the Super Bowl tickets that were meant for OP. A small theft cost the boss a client, and it also left a black stain on boss's reputation. The story is from Fox. Revenge on the movie producer. Please allow me to note well in advance, this story is not mine. In fact, it's a rather popular story in a town I once lived in, Savannah, Georgia, and centers around one homeowner who got royally annoyed with a movie producer. There will be a note at the end about the fellow this story is about for those interested. Okay, so first and foremost, when movie producers are looking for places to set a movie that takes place in colonial or even 1800s cities in the US, due to the sheer number of parks, wide roads, and period houses, they will often select Savannah, Georgia. They'll pull all the Spanish moss out of the trees, or trim it back, pour dirt on the roads around the squares, and effectively backdate that part of the city to fit most any place, even up to some having used the area as a setting for places like early Washington, D.C., and even places in Britain or France. Typically, when producers do this, they will pay each homeowner whose house is used as background flavor a couple $1,000s for the licensing to do so. That will be important later. Trust me. They issue some rules, like no electric lights being visible, not coming out of any door that faces the street, and you have to move your automobiles away from the drive, if you have a drive. Well, 1979, a producer came from Hollywood with the intention of using Savannah for that very purpose. Specifically, the producer was from one of the big three-letter TV channels and was working on making a made-for-TV movie talking about the events after the assassination of Lincoln and the subsequent accusations of the doctor present at his death. The production went to the city to seek permission and then sent an announcement out to each of the homeowners telling them of the various days that the shoot was going to take place. However, much to their downfall, they also noted that the production company would not be compensating the homeowners for the use of their homes as backdrops. This was met with some great annoyance by the homeowners, who turned to the city for help, only to be told that it was their civic duty to allow the use of their homes. Most everyone agreed to this and bit their lips. One homeowner, however, didn't. He decided to get revenge on the production, attempting to screw up their shooting every chance he got. He first started by leaving his car out in front of his house, only to have it towed before filming started. He threatened legal action against the studio, but that fell on deaf ears. He forbade the use of his home in some of the shots, but the production company got the city to make him back down. Eventually, enough was enough. So he waited, biding his time until he was certain they were filming. When the day came that his house was being used as a background shot, the homeowner grabbed a massive Nazi flag and hung it out front of the house, out of one of the top windows. The production company balked. They knew that this ruined any shot they'd used there. And what's more, they started to question just when he'd put the flag up. Was it just the one day? Or had all the previous shots, some which showed the house from across the square, been ruined as well? They turned to the city for help, and the city just basically shrugged, saying that it was his First Amendment right to do that, and implied that had the production company paid the homeowners, as had always been done before, then this probably wouldn't have happened. In the end, the production company had to end shooting and go to the homeowner begging for him to remove the offending flag. He did eventually do so, but only after his lawyer got a contract in writing that required the production company to pay all the homeowners for having their homes in the shot. The flag came down and shooting wrapped in less than a day. Interestingly, it's said that in the movie in question, The Ordeal of Dr. Mudd, there are several shots where you can see a bright red Nazi flag flying from one of the homes in the distance. That stunt cost a producer quite a substantial amount of money and pushed production back at least a year while they tried to find every single instance that the flag flew in the background shots. This homeowner would go on to himself become very famous, though not for a good reason. Even so, he lives on among the legends of that city, both for his revenge against a movie producer and his later brush with fame. The fellow in question is none other than Jim Williams. Williams was an American antiques dealer and a historic preservationist based in Savannah, Georgia. He played an active role in the preservation of the Savannah Historic District for over 35 years. Williams was arrested on May 2, 1981, for the alleged murder of 21-year-old Danny Hansford, with whom he had been having a homosexual relationship at Mercer House. After the subsequent 4 trials, a record in the state of Georgia, Williams was finally acquitted by a jury in Augusta in May 1989, 8 years after his arrest. Williams died in 1990 of heart failure, though AIDS is also suspected. He is the center of the story Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil novel, and later Clint Eastwood movie. Wow, it was really a brilliant and bold revenge and was executed with perfection. The homeowner forced the production company to rethink their entire approach. The story is from Robin Graves. Micromanager forced to step down after mismanaging a new retail service. This one might be petty and definitely not as epic as some of the posts I've seen here. And I'm long-winded. Relevant background info first. Anyway, several years ago, I was working at one of the big hardware stores in my area. It's a household name and had some upward mobility with decent pay for the area. I never really found a niche there after my first year and a half. I learned quickly though, so they kind of made me a Swiss Army employee. I could work hardware, plumbing, mix paint, make keys, prepare contracts for installs, and knew all the features and flaws of the appliance models we sold. I was happy to do this because I was building a reputation as someone who could do everything. 2 years in, a new program was implemented that I was uniquely qualified to assist with. They created a new position for me. It was marketed as an all-in-one renovation remodel service for interiors. I was to assist the designer with product selection, product information, contracts, and local marketing for this service. Everyone involved was super excited about it. Note, I was still only making $10 an hour in 2015 for this. The problem was that because this was brand new, no one knew how it should work. The designer basically had to figure it out for herself while I tried to catch her up with all of the store and product knowledge I had accumulated during my unique experience with the company. issues with the program. It was way too expensive. Product to be used had to come from one of our stores, which was limiting. No one knew about it. It was a rocky start. Co-workers would call me over to talk to customers if they mentioned working on a big project, but that's all we had. No completed jobs to reference or anything provided by corporate to get us running. We made our own stuff. I put together a video advertising the service and got the nod from management to use company card to purchase a TV and media player to roll the video on repeat. We built vignettes in the store to showcase our design ability. I had been picking up a lot from the designer, so it ended up being a partnership in effect. The micromanager. Enter Devon, the assistant manager. He had actually been involved in the project from the beginning and had been pretty supportive and brought good energy at first. But I think he got fed up with issues that we couldn't control. Sloppy contractors refusing to fix things that they messed up. Slow design processes customers worked out what they wanted and people just backing out after taking a bunch of our time when they see the price. We were, on average, charging 3 Cali more for a small bathroom remodel on labour alone. Consulting and design fees were also worked into the final cost. The product was discounted to basically being tax-free, but as I mentioned, options were limited to products the company sold. It was just too expensive to make many sales on the poorer side of town, where almost everyone knows some kind of contractor or tradesman with connections. It wasn't a good market for this program, but we did manage to start hitting and exceeding our numbers. The 7 in the region for the brand new program was not bad. And just when we finally started getting some business and a rhythm around 8 months in, Devon decided that it was not working fast enough for him. Obviously, the designer was to blame since he had no authority over the contractors or setting prices. She didn't know what she was doing, and he was going to make some changes. He honestly didn't do much besides hover, bring bad energy, and make terrible suggestions. He didn't understand the scope of what we had to do to get a customer out the door and happy. He forced us to cut corners and get the sale as quickly as possible without concern for liability, for basically destroying a room in someone's home to remake it, or what was realistic in terms of timelines. Customers felt rushed and got nervous. They backed out. We came to a standstill. We would only have 2 or 3 designs in progress at a time. But suddenly, after working our asses off building the program, we had no customers for the first time in 6 months. Obviously, Devon was not subjecting us to his authority hard enough. So he went harder and fired the designer. I lost my patience. Justice or injustice, IDK. I'm a chill dude, but I had been working my ass off for this company, making peanuts on the promise that I was working towards something. I endured working for the incompetent managers that got their positions because they started working there at 18 and made it their life. The toxic alpha male, I will lead, you will follow. BS was too much. So I started bullying him back, making fun of him in a teasing way where he couldn't really react without looking bad or losing control. I did that for a while, and he left me alone to run the program in the interim since I was the only option. The designer and I had become friends though, so I was still mad about how it went down. I wasn't finished yet, but I didn't know what to do. Eventually, they got another designer, and Devon had me moved back to what I had been doing before. Passed over for several promotions that I was more than qualified for. The market had been flooded with long-time employees that were being moved around. Bad luck, but I was done with the place. One day, we were sent an email link to an anonymous manager review survey. The store computers were set up with an always-on and logged-in user profile, so I wrote down the link and verified with a coworker that they weren't unique. In every department I visited that day, I wrote a review for Devon. All different ratings, some good, some bad, but I made the good ones so that they sounded bad, but as if I didn't know it was bad. I did that maybe 10 times. It wasn't character assassination or anything, just opinion-based stuff with some vague examples so no one could figure out it was me. I didn't lie either. I just said what people don't usually say out loud. He would barely look at anyone after that. A couple of weeks later, he resigned his position as assistant manager and took an exterior design position at the other end of the store, as far away from the departments he had been over before. Basically, the same thing as what we had done with interiors, but he was in the designer's shoes. I left a couple of months later to work tech support for DHS, but while I was still in training for that, my friends from the store told me he had gotten fired. Maybe he learned something? He should at least have learned how my designer friend felt. They were both fired at Christmas. The revenge was subtle but destructive. After being micromanaged by Devon and watching him ruin the renovation program, the employee manipulated anonymous reviews, exposing Devon's flaws without outright lying. This review finally engulfed Devon's job. The story is from Called in the 90s. A lawyer's pro-revenge on his boss. This opinion is shit, my boss told me. He'd been a lawyer for 3 years, and the firm assigned me to him for training, to show me, junior counsel, how to be a litigator. I disliked my boss for a number of reasons. He knew no law, and he expressed himself badly in writing. For a litigator, that's like strike 1 and 2 right there, and strike 3 was this. He had no balls. He was actually scared of going to court. I noticed this when he took me to assignment court one day, and when it was his turn to speak, his hands were shaking. He was scared, in fucking assignment court, where all you do is set a trial date. "What's wrong with what I wrote?" I said. "Not what I asked for," he said, turning away. But when I checked the memo he'd emailed me 2 weeks earlier, I saw that the opinion I wrote was exactly what he asked for. I knew what was up. He was going to delete my dockets for writing the memo and then claim he did it himself, thus leaving quite a bit short of my docketing quota for the month. I knew that he would do this to me because he'd done this before. I knew that my memo would wind up on a partner's desk without my name on it. I knew that for a fact because the firm I worked at was one of the first in the city to have a really good internal network. We were using email for internal communications before the internet became a thing. So the firm was way ahead in terms of technology, but not in terms of security. And not long after I joined the firm, I learned how to surf away on the firm's hard drive and find interesting things, like evidence that my boss was plagiarizing my work. My boss was the very model of the young downtown lawyer. His perfect shoes always gleamed. He wore bespoke suits because he came from money. Everyone just took it for granted that he was on the partner track. I, on the other hand, was well on my way to nowhere special, so maybe he thought it was okay to fuck with me. If so, that was a big mistake on his part. I didn't like having my billable hours fucked with. I seriously resented it, because I was already being targeted as one of the juniors who doesn't docket as much as he should, and I was getting pushback from the partner who headed our team. I told the partner what was going on, but he didn't care. It was like being back in middle school and showing up in the office with bruises on my face and the principal saying, "Boys will be boys," and sending me on my way. "You'll just have to work harder or smarter," the partner said when I reported the latest bullshit thing my boss did to me. I couldn't work harder. I was doing the usual 6 days a week lawyers downtown is forced to do. But I could work smarter, and that night I thought up a plan. Christmas was coming, and I thought I'd give my boss a little present. It landed on his desk on December 24th, in the form of a memo purporting to be from the partner that my boss reported to. The partner was an old guy, and not really on board with emails and computers, so he did everything old school on paper. So when my boss came in on December 24th and saw a memo on his desk from the partner with a legal research assignment, that wasn't unusual. The memo was drafted in the usual form that the partner used because, of course, I had taken great pains to make sure that it looked authentic. My boss walked over to the little cubicles where the juniors worked and gave me the same memo. Except his secretary had retyped it, so now the assignment was from him to me instead of from the partner to my boss. The assignment was difficult, requiring me to do a deep dive into Admiralty law, its relationship to the common law, combined with a constitutional division of powers question. "But this is a huge assignment," I whined, "and I'm going to be away. Can't you get someone else to do it? Is it really urgent?" The memo I'd forged to my boss stressed how totally urgent the situation was, but there was no way my boss could double-check with the partner, because the partner left the day before on vacation. That's why I'd waited until December 24th. No can do, my boss said. This is a big deal. Just let HR know. Maybe they'll give you time and half or something. He turned his back and walked away, thinking he had ruined my holidays. But he was mistaken. You see, I'd written a paper for a third-year course that was basically the same thing as the research assignment in the memo. So the only work I had to do was to find the old floppy disk with the draft on it, fiddle with it a bit, and voila. A very detailed and very long memo on an obscure point of Admiralty law, with references starting back to Lord Coke's day. So I put the memo together and took my holidays as planned. I wasn't travelling anywhere, because I had no money, but I saw my family and stayed in town, and I made a point of dropping by the office during the holidays, sending an email or two, establishing that I was around, and docketing all my time for the huge amount of research I was allegedly doing. So the holidays end, and I'm sitting in my shitty little cubicle with a huge stack of work to do, and my boss comes up to me in one of his bespoke suits with a gold tie pin and cufflinks to match. He was wearing a gold watch too. He was dressed up, even for him, trying to make an impression of some kind. "Where's that memo? You were supposed to have it on my desk when I got back. I'm going into a meeting at noon." "Just finished it this morning," I said, handing him the lengthy memo that was still warm from the printer. My boss took the memo in his hands and felt its heft, and he smiled. Then he turned and walked away without a word. Just before lunch, I heard a commotion down the hall. It was a pretty loud commotion, as such things go, a loud "fuck," and then a door was flung open. It was the partner, and he was screaming for my boss to get his ass into his office. Now, right now, as in immediately. I had the pleasure of watching my boss scramble down the hall. "Just what the fucking fuck is this?" the partner said, standing in the doorway to his office and holding my handiwork at arm's length with his thumb and index finger, as if he were afraid that handling it would soil him. My boss mumbled something, and then the partner ushered him inside. I heard more shouting, then the sound of muffled excuses, and then more shouting from the partner. Then the door flung open again. "Call it in the 90s. Get your ass in here too," the partner said, and I got my ass in there pronto. "Did you write this fucking memo?" the partner said. I took it from him and looked it over. "I wrote it. The cover page has been changed to remove my name, but other than that, it's mine. I spent all Christmas on it. Is there something wrong with it?" The partner exploded. "Is there something wrong with it? Something wrong? I'll tell you what's wrong with it. It's fucking useless. Totally useless." I explained that I'd followed my boss's instructions to the letter and that I'd docketed more than 100 hours on it. At this, the partner really went nuts and told me to go back to my desk and fetch him the memo from my boss. I brought it to him, and when he read it, his face went red. He told me I could leave, and I hauled ass out of there. From my little cubicle, I wasn't close enough to hear the full chewing out my boss got, but I heard the details through the grapevine over the next few days about how the partners were seriously pissed that my boss had wasted over 100 hours of a junior's time on a useless task that was obviously a prank. And how had my boss not realized that he was being pranked? Was he an idiot? I wasn't blamed at all, of course. I had been working under my boss's close supervision. My boss didn't get fired, but there were some good outcomes for me. For one thing, the partner told me to send him a copy of any memos I wrote for my boss, and that ended him taking credit for my work. My boss also stopped deleting my dockets for my research. Plus, I got a belated Christmas bonus for having to give up on my alleged vacation to write the stupid memo. I really hated working in that place, but whenever times were tough, I'd think back to the case of the forged memo, and that always brought a smile to my face. OP had a very satisfying prank on his toxic boss. The boss wanted to spoil OP's holidays, but the prank ended up ruining boss's own reputation in the office and raised questions about his competence. It was really satisfying. Kudos to the OP for exposing the reality of toxic boss. Story is from Mint Condition 77. Deliberately deplete my prepaid phone balance? You will pay for it 1,000 times over. I went to middle school in the early 2010s, right before smartphones really took off. I got my first phone right before starting 6th grade. It was a slide phone with a pay. As you go, plan that cost 0.10 per minute for calls and per text message sent or received. Worse yet, sending or receiving photos cost 0.25 each. It was very expensive, and my parents only gave me $100 a year for this. If I exceeded the amount, I had to cover the rest with my limited birthday and Christmas money I had. Fortunately, most of my friends were good about helping me preserve the balance. They would call, and I'd let the call drop, but immediately call back on a landline so it wouldn't count as a call. And they'd email me or message me on Skype for most things. Everything was good until Derek joined the group in 7th grade. At first, we thought he was funny, but we quickly got fed up with him as he was very unpleasant and exhibited many antisocial behaviors. He started drama within the friend group and also caused issues between us and other kids outside of the group. He was manipulative and always played the victim when others rightfully called him out on his shit. And he knew how to charm parents, so getting rid of him was easier said than done. He was the one friend who didn't respect my phone situation. He very frequently texted me dumb memes, even though I told him multiple times to just email or Skype them to me instead, since picture text messages cost $0.25 each. Unfortunately, blocking phone numbers was a feature that was unavailable for this pay as you go plan, so there was nothing I could do as he spammed my phone. One day, he got mad at me for some reason and spammed my phone with memes. He must have sent me over 100 locates over text. He kept sending them until I lost service since my phone balance was depleted. I had lost the $40 remaining in my account as a result. I was extremely pissed and demanded that he pay me the $40 he had cost me, and he refused and said it wasn't his problem. I got home from school really upset and told my dad about the situation, expecting him to go and tear Derek's mother a new one and demand the money, but my dad said that it wasn't worth the battle. I even asked him about a small claims court, but he said that not all battles are worth fighting, and that the effort wasn't worth $40. He took me to the carrier's store and loaded $50 onto the phone. The carrier changed my phone number, and they managed to block Derek's number. They had initially said that blocking phone numbers wasn't possible with this plan, but my dad insisted and would not leave the store until they did it. I was extremely paranoid about my phone number being leaked and other kids spamming it to fuck with me. Fortunately, my parents got iPhones that summer and got me one too, and the new family plan had an unlimited text plan. Nonetheless, I was pissed at the $40 he essentially stole from me out of malice. Fortunately, not too long after, there was a big blowout between Derek and the rest of the friend group at the end of the school year, and we permanently kicked him out of the group. He was an outcast the following year in 8th grade. Nobody was tolerating his shit anymore. And he changed schools the year after, and we never heard from him again. Fast forward to a few years ago, I was back home for a few months, between graduating college and starting a new job on the other side of the country. I went out to some garage sales one Saturday morning, and I ended up at Derek's house. I recognized his mother, but I don't think she recognized me. I guess glasses and a beard is all you need. I noticed some Pokemon napkins out for sale, and when I picked them up to look at them, Derek's mom said that her son had been obsessed with Pokemon for his whole life, and that she was tired of Pokemon stuff occupying her home for so many years. I said that these napkins were for my younger cousin, who is really into Pokemon, and asked if she had any more Pokemon stuff. She said she didn't know people were still into that, and that there were a few boxes in the attic with her son's old stuff. She actually took me inside the house, which I never imagined I'd set foot inside ever again, and let me climb up the attic ladder and take down several large boxes to look through. The first one had Christmas ornaments in it and other junk, but I freaked out inside when she opened a box jam-packed with Pokemon video games in the original boxes, though I kept my cool on the outside. The whole reason I had agreed to go inside in the first place was because I was holding out hope of this exact scenario happening. See, I knew Derek was obsessed with Pokemon. Our friend group liked Pokemon back in the day, even when other kids thought it wasn't cool, but Derek was on a whole different level. He bragged about his Pokemon collection all the time. At the time, he had every single main series game in the original box, and in mint condition, as he always had to add in. I went to his house once and he was showing me his collection. He yelled at me for touching one of the games. Nobody was allowed to touch them except him. He had many older Nintendo games in excellent condition, but Pokemon was his favorite. He had had a couple of incidents with his mom damaging or throwing away his things. It wasn't out of malice, but just ignorance, as she didn't think the games or collectibles had any value. Fast forward into the present day, I was thinking about this. When I asked his mother if she had any other Pokemon stuff, she ended up bringing out the mother lode. We opened all of the boxes she had me bring down. Within the boxes, there was the beloved collection of Pokemon games, all very well preserved, as well as several Nintendo consoles, hundreds of games, 24 binders full of Pokemon cards, and there was also a box of many Lego sets with the original boxes and everything, with many old Star Wars sets. When I saw Jingo Fett, I knew I struck gold. I told her that I liked old Legos as well, and asked her how much for the 5 boxes of games, cards, and Lego sets, and she thought for a second and said $100 a box, or $400 for all 5. I told her I would take it all and hauled ass to get to an ATM. I loaded the 5 boxes into my dad's truck and immediately drove home. I knew there was potentially tens of thousands of dollars of goods here. This was the score of a lifetime, and I finally felt vindicated for the $40 Derek had taken from me all those years ago. I ended up giving all the stuff to my uncle, who's a hobbyist eBay reseller. He offered to sell it all. He was willing to go through the effort and sell everything individually. And despite my insistence, he said he wouldn't take more than a 10% cut of the profits after all fees and taxes. We went through and logged every single item along with the estimated value, and the total of the whole lot was about $40,000. $40,000 was a poetic number since this was 1,000x the value of what Derek stole from me all those years ago. My uncle sold most of the lot before the end of the summer and ended up writing me a check. Though it was considerably less than $40,000, it was still a life-changing amount of money for me. I was able to pay off my remaining student loans and put the rest towards a down payment on a new car. Though it might seem to be a revenge to some people, but it is a mean one. At that time, Derek was a kid, and what he did was certainly wrong, but OP's stealing $4,000 cannot be justifiable. OP is an a-hole. Pro revenge story is from PJ Murphy. Not going to pay overtime? Think again. TL. Dicta don't mess with the IT guy. I was discussing this sub with a good friend, and he said, "Boy, have I got a story that'll fit." It wasn't his story, but his brother's, and I sat with him and got the details. Buckle up, it's a good one. And a long one. Let's call him Bob. Bob has been fiddling with computers since he was a kid and knows them pretty well. As with most IT people, he's moved from job to job. The employer he worked for was a service/distribution company, and there were 2 IT employees. The company was located in Ontario, Canada. About 3 years ago, Bob's employer decided to modernize their software. They had separate programs for dispatching, for inventory, for payroll and finances, and it was complicated moving information from one program to the other. They decided to get an ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning program, and Bob recommended one that he knew inside out from a previous employer. For those of you who don't know, an ERP program handles everything: purchase orders, sales, inventory, personnel, vendors, customers, and all of it. You can run a report and find out which customer has bought the most Part ABC in the last year, which salesman has improved his numbers the most, which vendor has the fastest delivery time, which shipper packed the most orders. Everyone in the company used the ERP program, but it was very complicated, and they used the aspects of it that related to their position. For example, the receiver would accept a shipment, verify the quantity, confirm it was received, and the inventory stats would be available to the salespeople if they wanted to look up how many were on hand. The receiver didn't care what the price was or who the vendor was. He just did his job. Bob was run ragged during the implementation process, but he managed to train most of the employees on their aspects, and after a few months, everything was running fairly smoothly. Bob still got tickets for tweaks in the operation of the software and occasional hardware IT issues. Then the company decided to expand their footprint and was marketing into different time zones. That messed things up. Atlantic Canada is 90 minutes early, so if someone sent an email or an order at 8 a.m. their time, it would arrive at 6:30 a.m. Ontario time. Pacific Canada is 3 hours late, so an email sent at 3 p.m. Vancouver time would arrive at 6 p.m. This stretched out the day. So many staff came in early and worked late. Bob would arrive at 8 a.m., and there would be people that demanded his immediate assistance and were annoyed that he didn't respond instantly, even though their request was submitted before his start time. Same with late in the day. His phone would ring at dinner time with people that wanted help right now. They decided to stagger his and his IT colleagues' shift times. Bob would start at 6 a.m. and work till 2:30, and his colleague would start at 10:30 a.m. and work till 7 p.m. Bob's colleague had kids and refused the shift change. The employer insisted, the colleague quit. That meant that Bob was the only person in the IT department. The employer said they would look to hire a new IT guy, but they had trouble finding one that knew the ERP system, and they were offering well under a market value salary. Bob asked for a raise and was denied. Then he wanted overtime, and the employer told him that as an IT specialist, he was exempt from overtime laws in Ontario. Bob looked it up, and the employer was correct. This went on for some time, and he knew lots of IT people socially. They told him what the company was offering, and Bob knew that they wouldn't find another tech. Things went downhill from there. Bob would get chewed out if he missed a call or an email, no matter what time it came in. He had to train new hires in the ERP system, as well as take care of the hardware. He asked repeatedly for better compensation, and was denied, so he planned to get a new job. Now, here's the revenge. Bob had access to the entirety of the ERP program. When a user signed in, the time was logged, and even if they didn't sign out, after 15 minutes it would log them out anyway. Everyone in the company was on salary, and many of them came in early and stayed late. Ontario labour law states that even salaried workers are entitled to overtime after 44 hours a week, unless they were managers or supervisors. So Bob jumped into the program and ran a report for each employee that wasn't a manager, all the way back to when the ERP program was started. Then he reached out to an employment lawyer and got the okay to refer employees to him. Bob lined up another job, and after he left, every employee in the company got an email with an Excel sheet showing the hours they had put in past 44 hours a week. The subject line said, "You're legally entitled to overtime pay." In the body of the email was the lawyer's name. The shit hit the fan. Almost every employee authorized the lawyer to negotiate with the company on their behalf, and the company had to pay a ton of money. All the company had to do was pay Bob for the extra work he put in. Instead, they had to pay almost everyone. Bob's revenge was effective. The tracking of time using the company's ERP system allowed him to show the injustice he had to bear and helped his colleagues receive what was rightfully theirs by law. Instead of just quitting, Bob planned his exit well, making sure the company had to bear some financial repercussions of their decision to not pay overtime. His approach was brilliant, moral, and timely. It gave the company no other option but to award salaries to the employees they overworked. Justice was sweet, it was poetic, hitting them where it would hurt most, the bottom line. Perfect calculated revenge, if it were really so. Story is from Throwaway 5433. How I got my boss's job and my co-workers a 15% raise. Hey Reddit, I can finally share my story because now it is all over. I am on mobile also. English isn't my mother language, and this is my first post ever on Reddit, so please be gentle, haha. And sorry for the long post. To the backstory. This all happened in an EU country, I don't say which one, sorry. I did my apprenticeship in a mid to big size factory as a machine operator. After I completed my apprenticeship, I worked in the production for around 1 month. Then I got called into the office. and they asked me if I can do some holiday replacement, so I said, yes, why not better hours and clean work? I got taught the systems, which was pretty because I manufactured those parts for 1 year. After my coworker came back from their vacation, they asked me to stay and became a part of their team, so I said, yes, sounds good. So I was now working in the sale quality department. Now to the present time, 7 years later. Our team increased from 5 workers to 15 because of restructuring, which helped us a lot. My boss retired last fall, and after Christmas, we got a new young boss around my age, 27, who was a major asshole and sexist. We got a few weeks before him a new hire, a lovely young girl, age 19, which I trained her. If you are new, you are doing some error, which is totally fine in my opinion. So I come in last Tuesday to hear my new boss screaming like a maniac at this young girl. I asked her what happened, and she said she filled the wrong form, which happens even to me. My boss noticed it and screamed at her. I paraphrase it. Boss, you stupid little slut, who dumb can you be to fill out the wrong form? I should fire you and make sure that you never find any work in this field again. Co-worker started crying at this point. Then my boss stormed into his office and slammed the door shut. I asked my co-worker if she's okay, and she was still sobbing, so I brought her a coffee and took her to our office, Grandma. Everyone loves here so much. I was at this point pretty pissed and told everyone what happened. After they learned what he did to our new co-worker 3, stormed into his office and quit after 25 years in this company. Mick's boss said to them that they are worthless and overpaid. They told us that, and a plan was formed. Everyone will quit except for me, for now. What my boss didn't know yet, if we had a huge customer audit happening in 3 weeks, which I am the only certified to prepare for. If we fail this, it would cost us 15 to 20 million euros, and the customer would pull the contract. So after my boss learned that the whole department quit, except for me, he was even more pissed. Boss, hey, why the hell did everyone quit? Me. Maybe because you are asshole and a sexist pig? Boss, what did you just say, you asshole? Me. You know what I said, and do you remember the big audit in 3 weeks by customer X? Boss. Yeah, what's about that? Me. You know that I am the only one certified to prepare it, right? Boss. Yeah, and? Me. I quit as well because I do not want to work for such a asshole boss. See ya. And walked right out to my other co-workers to say goodbye in the whole factory. The production VP noticed it and asked what happens. So I told him, and he was pissed. He called the CEO, which I knew pretty well, and said, Robert, the shit hit the fan big time. Come down to the production floor now. The CEO asked if it's important, and the VP said, if you want to pass the audit in 3 weeks, then move your ass down here now. So the CEO came running down with the entire C-suits and asked, what's so important? Then I piped up and said, our whole department quit today and won't come back until this motherfucker of boss gets removed and fired. Then they asked what happens, and we told them. They were mad and asked how they can fix it. I said, fire him and hire a better fit. Because I held the most trainings and qualifications they asked me, which I gladly said yes. So we took off to my new office with my old department and the CEO in tow. My boss saw me and said arrogantly, decided to came back a beg for your job back, you little R-word? Me, nah, just to inspect my new office because you are fired by now. He laughs and said that I am under him and only the CEO can fire him. So the CEO came around the little corner and said to my boss, get the fuck out of my company, you are fired, and I make sure that every company knows what you did. My ex-boss was white as a sheet. After that, the CEO called the police and reported him trespassing. In the end, I got a 70k raise and a bonus option, which I declined and asked if we can split it for my co-workers. I don't need that much money, 1 million euro worth of bonuses. My CEO agreed and everyone got their job back, and we complete the audit without any fails. The customer was happy, and so we are too. If you have questions, I will answer them in the commands. The revenge was really epic. OP stood up for his co-worker, united the whole team, and exposed a toxic boss, all while keeping his company's future in mind. By quitting at the most critical moment, OP forced leadership to take swift action, and in the end, he secured a fairer, healthier work environment for everyone. OP not only took a successful revenge, but also showed his leadership skills. Our story is for my love underscore Boba43. Naval officer didn't want to live with enlisted, gets fired. So this happened about 1.5 years ago, but I recently heard the news on how far my revenge went. I was a Navy enlisted service member and was stationed in Yokosuka, Japan for a few years before I got transferred back stateside. I worked in the main hospital that cared for service members and their beneficiaries. It's a small hospital, so everyone knows everyone. Shortly after I left, I caught wind of a new physician officer working in the radiology department. My friends would say he's horrible to work with, but that's nothing new. However, someone saw him print a letter, and he left it on his desk and took a picture of it and sent it to me. He's requesting to move from enlisted housing to officer. Edit. Found out it's not a private letter. He did actually send it to housing, and most of housing is ran by enlisted members. For context, military housing is available for those who are married, have a family, or are qualified based on their rank and depending on the military base itself. Typically, officer housing is much nicer than the enlisted. In Yokosuka, housing is basically the same all around because it's overseas. But most of the housing are apartments, and each apartment complex is called a tower. Example, Fuji Tower. There are 9 towers and 2 are for officers since enlisted members outnumber officers by a lot. Now, one thing about the military, shit happens. When getting stationed, it is the active duty member's responsibility to either apply for housing on or off base before arriving, depending on what is allowed. If there is limited space and you don't apply for housing on time, then you get put where there is space. So our new officer got placed in an enlisted tower. Mind you, enlisted members have families of their own, and other officers have been placed in enlisted housing before without an issue. Here are some quotes in his letter. And yes, this guy has a PhD. I have many valid objections to living in a building of almost all enlisted, and even many lower enlisted being an officer. There is a lot of crime, violent actions, drug use and alcoholism that happen in enlisted housing. There are also sexual assaults and other perverts. I have a good-looking family, a wife and 2 daughters aged 3 and 4. They are prime targets to be victims for these enlisted deviant activities. My family should be safe in housing that is with officers. Officers are much more respectable, and these types of deviant activities are incredibly rare compared to the deviant activities of enlisted being commonplace. Other officer families will not want to visit us because our family lives on enlisted housing. My children need to make friends with other officer children. My wife needs to make friends with other officers' wives. I need to make friends with other officers. Forcing an officer to live in a large apartment building with almost all enlisted is unethical. You get the idea. So this guy basically looks down on all enlisted service members, assuming every single one are drug users, perverts/paedo, criminals, etc. The kicker? He was an enlisted army member before going to officer school. In civilian terms, think of a manager that discriminates and calls all of his subordinates criminals, violent, alcoholics, perverts, drug users, etc. based on your job position. Forgetting that some have a family and, maybe aren't any of those things. And he not only has the authority to ruin your work life, he can ruin your personal life, deny days off, make you stay late, write you up if he doesn't like you and not letting you promote. Safe to say, everyone was pissed and I have nothing to lose. I was separating soon and figure I'd have some fun before I get out. I created a burner Facebook account and posted the letter and the officer's picture on a popular military enlisted group page. Within 2 days, it spread like wildfire. But I wasn't done yet. The military has something called challenge coins. Think of trading cards but custom coins that come in many shapes and sizes. I designed one with his face and a big middle finger in the back. On top of that, I designed stickers to show how proud US deviants are. Other coin designs came from other people as well, but so far, I think mine was more popular. I sold over 70 coins to the initial person who originally sent me the picture at a huge discounted price, so she can sell them for a profit for herself. so the officer's face is everywhere because most people keep their coins displayed on their desk. No matter where the officer went at work, he would see his face on someone's desk. And since it didn't have his name on the coin, can't officially say it's him. I sold more stateside and even some got sent to Europe. I made about 3K dollars overall, which was nice. The story even got featured on the online naval newspaper and on 2 popular YouTube channels. And if you're military, you know the only time big military care is when it's too big to sweep under the rug. This story got the officer sent up to captain's mast, which is like Navy court. He tried to say his wife was the one that wrote the letter, but no one is buying it because her writing style is way worse. She even tried to take the fall, but no one believed her. They both ended up deleting all social media. Due to this, he got served 3 UCMJ articles, which basically are his offences. But there's more. When you're in the military, you have a deadline on how long you can be a certain rank. If you don't pick up, then you're kicked out. And because he's new and got served UCMJ articles, he won't be up for promotion and therefore was involuntarily separated. Also, the officer program he went through pays for his PhD. When the military pays for your PhD, you have to serve 10 years to pay them back. If you don't complete 10 years, you have to pay the military back with money instead of time. So he lost his job and now has to pay back the military for his PhD, and since it takes a while for the paperwork to have him and his family sent back stateside, you can bet he socially suffered because no one worked with him. Edit. The hatchet became a symbol of enlisted deviance because in his letter, he stated that 2 gangs were attacking each other with hatchets and other weapons at an enlisted housing unit. It was really a perfect revenge and far-reaching consequences. The enlisted personnel brought down the egoistic officer, ruining his career and making him repay the military for his PhD. His career and reputation were destroyed, and he became socially isolated both professionally and personally. This was really a satisfying revenge. The long story is from Sister in my wedding. Sister wants to walk down the aisle at my wedding. We used that to our advantage. Here I am, writing this long tale in my honeymoon. But it does feel cathartic to finally type it out. And my husband is more excited about this than the resort drinks. Lol. Anyway, this is a throwaway because I don't have a Reddit account, and my husband, the Reddit fanatic, said he doesn't want this associated with his main. As to why the Reddit guy isn't the one writing this, it's because he said, since it's my family, I should be the one with the honor of posting the story. But he is looking over my shoulder to help out. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know if this works, but I do not give permission for this to be reposted anywhere else. So, I think first it's necessary to give some background, to explain how this behavior reached this level, and why our responses were as they were. It's a long read, I apologize. So, ever since I could remember, my parents loved my sister more. I don't mean in subtle ways either. If my sister accused me of something, they'd believe it and punish me. If I accused her, they wouldn't believe. Even if there was undeniable proof, they'd still give her a lesser punishment and try to find a way to scold me in tandem. My birthday cake had to be a flavor she wanted. Hers did not, and my parents always denied knowing I didn't like that type of cake. They always bought her a bit more than for me. We went to where she wanted, even if it was an event that should be about me. My sister grew up spoiled and didn't like me, just used me as a punching bag. But at first, she mostly ignored me. But then it got really bad when we were young teens. I'm not sure what the cause and effect are, but she found herself with no friends and her behavior got worse. Did her friends move? Did they ditch her because she was mean? I don't know, because we were never close, and my parents loved to boast about her achievements, but never ever mentioned any issues. Whereas with me, they loved to bring out any flaws of mine constantly as teasing material. I only knew she had none because we went to the same school and I noticed her no longer walking around with people. Anyway, she had no friends. I did. I used to be decently popular. My sister realized that, and suddenly I stopped being the occasional punching bag to a hated person she needed to take down at all times. She started accusing me of more stuff. She accused my friends of more stuff. My parents stopped allowing me to hang out with anyone, the excuses ranging from, "They're not good people according to your sister," to "Why are you trying to leave us? Why can't you be like your sister and enjoy family time?" What saved me from complete isolation was extended family. Most of my family lived in the same hometown, and I got along with my cousins despite some age difference. At one gathering, they invited me over to something, I don't remember what, and I sadly replied, "I'm not allowed to go anywhere." When asked why, my kid self with no filter replied that it was because I wasn't allowed to have friends since my sister didn't have any. Well, that reached the adults, who apparently tore my parents apart. Later, I was scolded for lying and grounded, as if I had anywhere to go, for a month. But after that, they allowed me some leeway, so it was worth it. And my sister changed schools. I guess the humiliation of extended family knowing her social status was bad, and she demanded to be changed. And my parents immediately obliged, even though it cost them more since the school was further away. But she made friends on the new school. However, she never went back to the previous status quo of mostly ignoring me. I guess having felt the power of how badly she could screw with me, and anger that I told family she had no friends, she never let me go. My life was still bad. Her friends would come over and bully me, and my parents called it light teasing. I never called friends over because my parents were awful hosts to them, or my sister would accuse them of taking stuff, and they'd believe it. I did become close to my cousins, though, since my parents never dared do any of that to family. And then I got my first boyfriend. I didn't want to bring him home at all, but my parents insisted. Well, at one point, we were separated, and he came to find me to tell me my sister was flirting with him. By which he meant she came over with skimpy clothing, batting her eyelashes really badly, and started telling him how bad I was and how good she was. He was irked and ran off to find me. Of course, my sister told my parents a different tale, that my BF had instead tried to flirt with her, but she naturally refused, since how could she do that to me? Guess who my parents believed? Now, my BF wasn't perfect, but I immediately believed him, for a mean reason. But remember that back then I was a teen, and suffering from the unfair bad treatment. I was very resentful and moody, and now hated my sister as much as she hated me. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about looks. I hadn't mentioned them yet because they weren't relevant. My parents are overweight. And since they liked showing love via food, giving you more food, buying treats, etc., my sister is also overweight, whereas am not. In fact, I've always been kind of skinny because punishment often included no treats or snacks. Obviously, weight isn't what matters, personality is. But my sister even then was already rude and spoiled. Even her flirting attempts were bad because she never learned to work for anything since she could demand and my parents would deliver. Added to that the fact that she didn't look like some CA model. Even my self-conscious teen self didn't believe my BF would try and cheat on me with her. Anyway, my parents prohibited me from dating such a horrible boy. I did try to keep going in secret, but it was hard, and the relationship ended. I did get another, but again my sister accused him of flirting with her when he refused her advances. Again my parents believed her. I tried pointing out how this happened again, but they decided that meant I was incapable of making good choices and kept picking bad boyfriends. The relationship couldn't handle the Romeo-Juliet situation and fizzled out again. I would eventually get called a slut in high school as I was fine with making out with boys and such, but refused to have relationships. Thankfully, it never got back to my sister or parents. My sister did bring one boyfriend home during all this time. He was paraded with pride, and my parents spent every second telling me how good he was. And why couldn't I be like my sister and find myself someone like that? Until he stopped showing up, and suddenly he was conniving bastard that tricked my sister. Oh well. And the unequal treatment continued at this time. She had more spending money, her curfews were much better than mine, she was free to go anywhere at any time while I couldn't. If I pointed it out, my parents would say it's because she's older. But when I reached that age, I still didn't have the same treatment she had. And when pointed out, they'd deny they ever said that or claim it was because I couldn't be trusted like she was, using my sister's accusations against my BF and friends as proof of my bad judgment. Time goes by, and it is time for my sister to graduate. She was accepted into a college, not a very well-regarded one, and she had no scholarship or anything. Again, because only her achievements were told to me, I don't know which colleges she even tried for, so I can't say how badly she was rejected. I do know her grades were bad in school though, because whenever she got a B, we would celebrate. I would usually get good grades, but my parents refused to celebrate, claiming since I always got those, what was there to celebrate? My parents naturally made a lot of fanfare and told her they'd pay for everything. I was relieved she'd be going away. Not that it made my life any easier. She'd always come home every other weekend and somehow stuff kept missing from her room, or some other issue she'd think of to make my life miserable. My curfews were still strict, etc. Eventually, my mum came to talk to me about my impending graduation. I'm only a year younger than my sister. She told me, since they were paying for my sister's college, they had no money to pay for mine. So it would be better for me to start working immediately after graduation and waiting until my sister finished uni to see if they could afford something for me. Oh, and if I decided to stay at home, I'd have to pay for all my stuff, part of the bills, and rent. I pointed out I could get student loans. Mum said yes, except no. That is, because they were so caring towards me and I had such bad judgment, they would decide if a college was worth my getting in debt or not. I'm not sure how they'd stop me from getting loans, but I didn't ask. Scholarships weren't mentioned. They had no idea what my grades were anymore and never believed in my capabilities. Anyway, I didn't bat an eyelid. I simply said, okay. My mom clearly didn't expect that and kept pushing. Maybe she hoped I'd throw a tantrum so they'd have an excuse to not ever pay for my college. But I said nothing except I understood their position, thanked them for caring, and that was that. My dad later tried the same, but I also refused to be emotional. You see, after a whole lifetime of their terrible parenting, I never had any expectations towards my education. I knew they would find an excuse to not pay for mine and make my life miserable. I never believed they would eventually pay it if I worked and waited for my sister to graduate. I had been preparing for college for a long time. I could barely go out, my friendships were slim, so I had a lot of time to study. And study I did, because I saw college as my only chance to be free. Well, the time came and I worked my ass off and got a scholarship. Not to anywhere like Ivy League or anything like law or medical school. But it was a good enough course, in a decent college, with a full scholarship. Knowing my sister would hate it and try to stop me via parents, I put my achievement in social media at the same time I told them. Even forced myself to thank them in the post. Now they couldn't forbid me from going, as they'd have to explain to family why not. Initially, they were even a little proud and boasting about it. And then, I guess my sister got to them, and they changed gears and even asked me if I was sure I wanted to go. They let slip my sister wasn't doing well in college, and since she was smarter and had better judgment than me, I'd suffer worse. I obviously stuck to my guns. They weren't happy, but couldn't do anything. College was my savior. I started being happy. I still contacted my parents and visited on holidays and such, but since they refused to pay for anything, I could excuse not going a lot due to money. During this time, I avoided introducing any man to them, and my sister stopped going to college. I know she didn't graduate because, again, they'd have made a fanfare about it, moved back home, paying no bills or rent, but it's different, my parents said, and started working at the same company as my mom, obviously thanks to my mom pulling strings. This was all sold to me as a source of pride. Oh well, almost there, I promise. I met my husband around this time. You know those people that say that if I was in X situation, I'd have done something? My husband is the type that really does. I'm the person that is meek and a doormat in any situation and then can't sleep at night wishing I had done something, had thought of something witty to say, etc. I'm the person that can't help but cry when I'm angry. My husband is the guy that claps back immediately. He loves drama in that he loves to resolve it. He's the guy that if he doesn't immediately reply to a slight, you better start worrying because he won't forgive and forget, He's just stewing something worse for revenge. He's the one that wanted me to post here, and wanted to post on a nuclear revenge board too, but decided what we did wasn't nuclear. People were baffled I got together with him. But just because I was incapable, thanks to my upbringing probably, of acting like him, it didn't mean I didn't like it. I love that my husband does what I can't, and he treats people well as long as they do the same to him. When we discussed marriage, we decided we didn't care much about the ceremony due to our budget, as we'd rather spend on a dream trip to Europe for our honeymoon. As for where to do it, since his family was spread out and mine was still mostly concentrated in my hometown, we decided to do it there. We weren't living too far off either, so we could take some long trips during the weekends to manage stuff. Plus, there was some work flexibility so we could stay in my hometown for a bit too if needed. We sent out the engagement announcement and the save the date for a few months later. Well, at this point, my parents naturally demanded they meet my man. I wanted to grow a spine and refuse, but was having a hard time. The distance had made me think maybe my parents weren't so bad. Well, my husband looked like I cancelled Christmas when I told him I would at least ensure they were never alone with him. See, he had been getting ready for this. He even bought a high-quality recorder he could hide in a pocket to record it all. He was stoked, thinking of all the ways he could refuse my sister's advances, insult her, and then spread the recording of her attempts to my family. So, off he went alone and excited to meet them, and came back later, euphoric. Babe! Babe! You won't believe the awful shit they wanted. Babe, we can fuck them over so bad, there's so many possibilities. I was confused and wanted to hear the recording, but he, smartly, told me it was better to listen to him first or else I'd misunderstand him. Well, he went there, and instead of the flirting, my parents and my sister sat him down. After some grumbling about not being okay with him, my judgment, etc., they proclaimed they were willing to pay for my wedding. On one condition. My sister would walk down the aisle on my wedding first, in a wedding dress. Their excuses were that it wasn't okay for a younger sister to marry first, so it was only fair if my sister had at least the experience of it. On my venue, with pictures being taken, and the dress, and she'd have a cake later too, etc. My husband will now type his part. Hey, vengeful husband here. Hell hath no fury like a pro-revenge, instant karma, nuclear revenge lurker when his beloved is scorned. That said, as much as my wife, she's my wife now, paints me as this quick-witted dude, I admit my neurons all but short-circuited when those folks legit suggested that shit like some sort of great fucking gift. Even Troy would rather take in the horse a second time, methinks. Alas, after my brain rebooted, I did have a whole-ass catalogue of insults about to spew out. But something in my soul whispered in my ear like the devil, string these fucks along. So I said I needed to think, see how my wife, back then fiancé, would react, and then ran out of there before I could give away my nefarious plans. Back to me, the wife. So my husband sincerely recounted how my parents wanted even my wedding to be about my sister, with a grin on his face. And had the recording to prove it. I was shocked. The distance had softened how bad they treated me, and I thought even they wouldn't go so far. Thankfully, my husband insisting on the angle of revenge helped me not go to a bad headspace. We had a blast thinking up ways to screw them over this, from ridiculously outlandish to what we thought was feasible. We then called his much more level-headed brother when we decided on a plan. It involved having 2 venue addresses, giving them the wrong one, etc. Well, level-headed brother scolded us for it. While he acknowledged he would never be able to convince us from retaliation, he at least showed us something like that would be hard to pull off. Some of our other ideas were also at danger of getting sued. So we eventually settled for the most benign plan. Act like we agreed, but then hire security and don't let her in. Obviously, if that was all, it wouldn't be pro-revenge. The rest is all mostly my husband. But he wants me to do the honors, so here goes. Just important to mention, everything he did was previously discussed with me, and were our mutual ideas. He went back to my parents. said he probed and thought I wouldn't be down with it. However, he didn't see the issue, and not wanting family to fall apart would be down to helping them do it. He pointed out, I don't like conflict, so if I was surprised with it, I might not throw a tantrum in front of all the people. On the other hand, marriage is a big thing, so who knew if I'd lash out? Thus, he suggested a compromise. They'd help pay for stuff. This way, I would feel even more pressure to not say anything, as not only would we be public, well, with our families there, but I'd be grateful to the help they gave, and that'd mollify me. He said my parents looked surprised by my grown sister starting skipping with joy, literally so, like a kid, so it was accepted. Important. My husband also claimed that due to some bad judgment in boyfriends in the past, these words were all my idea and I'm so proud of using their words against then LOL. I was distrustful and controlling and liked to check his phone and stuff to ensure he wasn't cheating on me. As such, it was imperative that nothing of this plan was ever put in any writing. For any discussion pertaining to my sister walking down the aisle before me, he'd go over to their house to talk. And so began the months of deception, where my parents and sister thought they were tricking me and my husband and I were milking them. How? Well, rather than pay for the wedding then lay low, of course my parents wanted input in everything. Some stuff that meant a lot to me, the songs and color palette. My husband would convince them to let it go to keep me in line. But since we never really cared for the ceremony to begin with, everything else was game. Or so they thought. What we did was thus. We'd go, say, to check the drink and menu options. We'd then accept the lowest or second lowest priced option. My husband would then secretly take my sister there to also try it out. Then sigh and say, it's a pity we don't want to abuse my parents' goodwill, so we wouldn't get the best options. Cue my sister demanding my parents pay for the best. My parents would then tell me not to worry and they'd pay for the most expensive. Same was done with photographer. Flowers. My husband handed my sister a bouquet of the flowers we wanted, then sadly expressed how I wanted some other tasteless flowers. Cue my parents telling me they wanted us to go with said flowers and they'd pay for it. Wedding dress. We hit a minor snag here. My parents wanted me to use a hideous dress. Okay, not outright hideous, but it wasn't my style and wouldn't look that good on me. We had planned on saying yes then, simply not using it. But my mom sent me a message about it, so there'd be proof I said okay. We had to go with me refusing in text and standing my ground. My husband went over there and said he'd see what he could do. My sister suggested ruining my desired dress, so I'd be forced to wear the other one. He pretended to agree. During all this time, they really kept communications outside any text. We made sure that it happened by, when my sister tried messaging my husband, have me reply to here. This solidified the I'm controlling and neurotic claims my husband was making. So they believed it and never risked anything in writing. And maybe some people might not like the thought of their partner going around and talking badly about them to family. But I'm such a doormat that the thought of being painting as this controlling and dangerous bitch is extremely funny to me, and I egged him on to do it. I guess I have a warped sense of humor, lol. Oh, and my sister did try to flirt with him, but he acted conflicted. Also, to really sell that he was with them, my husband would pretend to tell them things without my knowledge. But he never told them we hired security. It was really funny. My husband and I, who had sincerely considered a courthouse wedding to focus cost on our honeymoon, having this extravagant, expensive wedding and barely spending a dime. We called it back pay for emotional damages from my parents, LOL. I think my husband, okay, he just confirmed I'm right, LOL, was enjoying the whole tricking them more than planning our wedding, lol. I didn't think it was possible to witness a guy beaming at the thought of wasting his whole Saturday doing a car trip to discuss wedding details with his in-laws. But here we are. Soon, the day came. The plan my parents, sister, husband had come up with was, wait until everyone was seated. Since the bride always comes out late, they'd have my sister arrive at that precise time, to avoid me seeing her and trying to stop it, and walk down the aisle. By the time I heard what happened, it'd be too late to do anything. As for my dress, we saved some of the leftover fabric from my dress alterations, and my husband took that to my parents' place. Sister still lives with them even now, and showed them as proof he'd ruined the dress. Then said he had to go back to me as I was raging, and he needed to calm me down. He'd see them at the wedding. We made sure to keep our actual security hidden at first. As the guests and my parents arrived, all they could see was a woman with a list of names to check. Only after my parents arrived and sat down did we bring out security. A guy that looked like a bodyguard. We told him to not allow anyone my sister in, and even agreed on paying a handsome tip if he didn't reveal we told him that. Soon the time arrived. My parents got a text my sister was less than 5 minutes away, so my dad went and told people to start. My bridesmaids had been told to follow his lead beforehand, so they obeyed without checking with me. After they all went down and took their places, my dad stood up at the entrance, as if waiting for me. During this, a friend not in the wedding party texted me to get ready. This because if my husband or bridesmaids, etc., took out a phone and started texting, people might notice. This friend was in on the plan. She's my husband's friend, as willing to help stir drama as he is, and didn't care about being a bridesmaid or anything. Well, as soon as my dad took his position, the bridal song started playing. The doors open, and I come in. My dad looked aghast at me being there. He tried glancing behind me, but you can't see the venue entrance from where we were, so he couldn't see what happened to my sister. And then his phone rang. I saw the caller ID, and it was her. He just left me there with a mumbled, "Something came up." There were gasps and confusion all around. The friend in on it loudly asked what happened. I lied, and in a teary voice said he told me it wasn't supposed to be me there. It's not what he said, but my husband and I agreed that if he dared leave me, I should say that to make him look the worst possible. As for the tears, I wish I could say it was just my stellar acting, but no. Despite everything, a part of me didn't think he'd go as far as abandon me there. That the sister thing wasn't true, but an elaborate joke. I don't know. I was hurt, still am, so I was sincerely trying not to cry. The friend then loudly went, "What did he mean by it shouldn't be you?" So that as many people as possible could hear and spread it, then went, "I will go and check," and ran off. We decided to do this to make her create hell with the security and stop my dad from coming back and stopping the ceremony or something. At some point, my mom also left. At this point, my husband's dad quickly ran over and took my arm. He'd been forewarned he might need to. Watching him run desperately to me helped me smile. I walked down the aisle to whispers as people discussed what happened. Some apparently left to check too. When I reached my husband, though, all was well. He made me feel better joking. My sad face was so real, I deserved an Oscar. And don't worry, he'd rake them over the coals for what they did Lowell. We got married without a hitch. My parents didn't come back. I did notice a lot of people leaving then coming back during the party, but no one dared tell me what was happening. Someone did come and whisper in my husband's ear, and he went out. He came back after a while with a thunderous expression, but whispered in my ear he needed to go hide somewhere before he broke character and started smiling Lowell. Well, what happened is, it worked. The following is the summed account from friends, family, the security guy, and my husband that I received afterwards. My sister did arrive in a wedding dress. The security refused to let her in. Per our agreement, he claimed she must be in the wrong venue because there was already a bride. And yes, we tipped him really well as promised. My dad went there and tried threatening him with police, claiming he never heard of him, so he couldn't be working there. The security agreed to the police since he was hired by us and doing his job. My dad realized by then it'd be too late, and tried to demand he let my sister in. At this point, the friend came over, started shouting and insulting my sister and asking what was going on, basically stalling. My mom soon came and eventually other people. At this point, the wedding plan was bust. All my parents could do now is damage control, as everyone that learned about it was aghast. They'd try and pull it and screaming and berating them. The three naturally said it wasn't a secret and threw my husband under the bus. At this point, my husband was summoned. When he came over, he put on his best look of confusion and denied, denied, denied. To quote him, gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss, LOL. He denied having ever agreed to something so ridiculous. When they insisted he did, he demanded proof, and of course, they couldn't produce any. All text exchanges they could produce were about normal wedding decisions. My sister was scream-crying and apparently sat on the floor kicking her legs like a kid. My dad looked like he'd beat my husband, but security and other people held him back. Of course, they said they had no proof because my husband told them not to text. My husband laughed and said, "Wow, how convenient, huh?" Then again repeated, "Why would he ever agree to something so fucked up?" Tore them a new one about being awful parents, then said he wasn't going to let their stupid plans and lying get in the way of his wedding, and went back to me. No one believed them. The venue had cameras, but they refused to show me the recording as that was only for security purposes. But some people filmed parts of it. Watching my parents and sister get ripped apart by any and everyone that came out to check the drama was delicious. After years and years of being accused of stuff and not believed, to watch them have a taste was one of the best wedding gifts. My mother was crying. My dad kept changing from purple to white. My sister was still on the floor, crying and screaming. They kept insisting on that my husband was in on it. But people kept asking, why would my husband agree? Why was there no proof? Why did they want my sister to do this to my wedding? And they had no good answer to any of it. Eventually, they were told to leave and had no choice but to do so. My dad apparently had to drag my sister up as she refused to leave the ground. Again, people said nothing to me all night. I guess they wanted to spare me. And maybe it's because I was the bride and not just a guest for once, but it did feel like everyone was making extra effort to be nice, positive, and excited about everything. My husband says, all the expensive shit they were eating, drinking certainly helps, LOL. We had a blast. My husband maintained the forced angry face for only a short while before breaking out in smiles again. After that, we went to the hotel to catch some sleep before going to our honeymoon. Speaking of which, my parents did try to pay for our plane tickets, but we thought that was risky as they could try and cancel them or something, so we refused. Of course, since that whole thing, the three have tried to contact me. I've refused calls because my husband insisted on keeping a paper trail. I smart thing because my sister did eventually message me. I won't repeat it as it was very unhinged and didn't make much sense, but the important part was that she blamed me for her humiliation, called my husband a two-faced snake that fooled them for months. He wants to print and put that on our wall, LOL, and hoped, but was also certain it'd happen, that I'd get cheated on by him. She did also suggest he was cheating on me with her, actually. My husband took my phone, screenshot the call logs, screenshot my sister's message, screenshot some messages of my parents demanding I pick up the phone, and sent it all to my family group chat, and sent screenshots of messages to him, where they called him names and threatened him, but he kept up the "you're delusional, I never agreed to anything" shtick, and even threatened to sue them for defamation and harassment. He wrote a message in said group chat begging my family for help, as I was now being harassed by them constantly. He begged family to help stop them from trying to ruin my honeymoon now that they had failed to ruin my wedding, then finished neatly with a request that they don't share our locations, to avoid my parents sending my sister over and then claiming he had somehow agreed to pretend to fuck her in our honeymoon suite. LOL. My family assured him they'd take care of it. And indeed, since then, we've had silence. My husband is a little disappointed my sister didn't disobey, so he could tattle again while tearing her a new asshole. We'll see if it'll last. All in all, while I obviously would have preferred to have a normal, loving family at my wedding, at least for once in my life, they not only failed to ruin something meaningful to me, but I got them back. Extra info. Do I know why they treat me like this? I've been asked this question a lot, so I assume you all will think the same. I have wondered this all my life, and I still don't know. I tried asking when I was young, but they denied any difference and scolded me for acting spoiled, so I quit trying. I've thought of some many possibilities, but based on my observations, I think it's this. I was unplanned. They took a while to have my sister, so she was not only wanted but also like a miracle child after so long. However, given our age difference is quite small, I think they didn't expect to have a kid so soon or easily, and didn't use adequate protection way too soon after my sister's birth, and maybe didn't notice my mom was pregnant until too late. So they were saddled with an unplanned baby while still dealing with a newborn. And they're not that well off, so having the extra expense likely didn't help. So they resented me. But that's my conjecture. Regardless, I've accepted the answer won't truly matter. What they did to me was unwarranted no matter what. Did they really think this would work? My husband and I talked, and we have the theory that they never wanted to do this at all. We think my sister threw a tantrum over me getting married first when she barely gets dates, and they gave my husband that outlandish proposition. As in, they didn't want to pay for my wedding and didn't think we'd accept or that it'd even look good for them to do it. But by suggesting it and being refused, they could look like the good guys to my sister while having an excuse to not give me a dime. But then my husband accepted it and they couldn't backtrack, or else risk my sister turning on them. Summary. Because it did get too long. Bad parents want to have my sister walk down the aisle at my wedding first, in wedding dress and all. My husband pretends to go along with it and uses this as an excuse to get my parents to pay for the most expensive stuff possible for my wedding, which they only did because they thought it would be for my sister's sake. When the day comes, though, we hired security that didn't let her in. When family called out my parents, they said my husband was in on it. But my husband denied it. There was no evidence, so no one believed them. So now family is against them. No one believes them. My sister didn't ruin my wedding, and we got a lot of money out of them. OP and her husband played very well. They extracted money from OP's parents for their lavish ceremony, and they also didn't let OP's entitled sister walk down the aisle. Not only that, they hired security to stop OP's sister, adding to her humiliation. Such greedy, discriminatory parents deserve this type of revenge. It was perfect and ultimate. Bye-bye for now. Let's see you tomorrow.